It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend at my own ranch, but when the HOA called 911, I had no idea it would turn into the fight of a lifetime. They didn't know it, but they were the ones trespassing the whole time. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled through the rusted gate of my ranch, the late summer sun casting long golden shadows across the pasture. A warm breeze stirred the tall grass, and in the distance, the calm shimmer of the lake peeked through a curtain of trees like an old friend waving hello. It had been far too long since I'd come out here. Work had me buried neck-deep for the better part of a year, and this was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful weekend, away from the noise, stress, and crowds. No meetings, no emails, no deadlines. Just me, my fishing rod, and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I parked near the old oak tree at the edge of the lake and stretched out, feeling the tightness in my back start to ease. The lake had always been my favorite part of the property. It was small, maybe 3 or 4 acres wide, but beautiful, framed by willows and untouched woods. My grandfather dug it by hand back in the 70s, and our family had been using it for fishing, camping, and swimming ever since. I spent most of my teenage summers here, and after inheriting the ranch 10 years ago, I made sure to keep it maintained even when I couldn't visit often. After unloading my gear from the truck, I pitched my canvas tent a few feet from the water and laid out some firewood. I cracked open a cold drink, pulled a folding chair up to the lake's edge, and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. I didn't hear traffic or sirens or phones buzzing, just birds, bugs, and the soft splash of a turtle diving off a log into the lake as dusk settled in. I grilled some sausages over the fire and watched the sky shift from orange to deep violet. The stars began to appear one by one, and before long the entire sky was alive with them, a glittering canopy that made me feel small in the best possible way. I pulled out my old lantern, set it near the tent entrance, and leaned back, grateful to be alone, surrounded by nature, far from anyone who might tell me what to do. That peace didn't last. Around 9:30 p.m., just as I was climbing into my sleeping bag with a good book, I noticed a pair of headlights bouncing across the distant field. At first I thought it might be a lost driver, maybe someone from town who took a wrong turn off the main road. But as the lights grew closer, my stomach, they started to twist. The vehicle wasn't turning around. It was coming directly toward me. I stepped out of the tent, boots crunching in the dry grass, and held my hand up to shield my eyes from the glare. The truck stopped about 30 yards away and idled with its engine running. A man stepped out, tall, heavy-set, wearing a bright reflective vest and khaki pants, and pulled out a flashlight, pointing it directly at my face. "You can't be here," he called out loudly. "This is private property." My first thought was confusion, then annoyance. "What?" I shouted back, squinting through the beam of light. "This is my property." "I don't think so," he said, walking closer. "This land is part of the Lakeside Bluffs HOA. We don't allow camping on common ground after sunset." Common ground? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sir," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "this land belongs to me. The lake, the field, all of it. I've owned this ranch for 10 years, and my family's owned it for over 50. The man stopped in his tracks. I could see now that he had a clipboard in one hand and a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. "I'm Rick Hammond," he said, "president of the HOA board. I've never seen you at a meeting, and I'm telling you right now, you're trespassing." "Trespassing?" I almost laughed. "You've got it backwards. You're the one trespassing on my land." "I'm just doing my job," he said stiffly. "I had a complaint from a homeowner nearby. They said someone was camping illegally by the lake. We take that seriously." I walked over to my truck and pulled the laminated property map from the glove box. "Here," I said, handing it to him. "That's the survey my lawyer had done when I bought the ranch. It clearly shows the lake is within my boundary line. This is not common ground. It never has been." He studied it with a skeptical look, turning it over in his hands. "This doesn't mean anything to me," he muttered. "It's not certified." I took a step back, suddenly understanding what was really going on. This man didn't want to be wrong, and worse, he probably didn't care about facts. He just didn't like that I hadn't asked his permission to enjoy my own land. "I'm calling the sheriff," he said bluntly, pulling out his phone. I stared at him in disbelief. "You're seriously calling the police? You're refusing to leave private community property. That's a violation of our HOA code. You can't just do whatever you want out here." I wanted to argue more, to shout, to laugh, to shake him, but I knew better. I'd dealt with enough overzealous officials in my time to recognize when someone was dead set on flexing their power. So I let him make the call. I stood by my fire pit, arms crossed, as he relayed his version of the story to the dispatcher. "Yeah, male, mid-30s, camping out by the east end of the lake. It says he owns the land, but I've never seen him before. Doesn't have any visible HOA credentials. Refused to leave when asked. Credentials on my own land." I felt my blood pressure rising but forced myself to stay calm. Rick hung up and turned to me with smug satisfaction. "They're on their way." "Great," I said. "They can settle this once and for all." For the next 20 minutes we waited in tense silence. The only sounds the crackle of my fire and the distant howl of a coyote. I kept my flashlight aimed at the map in my hands, studying the boundary lines again just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Everything the man was saying was absurd, but I knew it wouldn't matter until someone with authority looked at the facts. Finally, the blue and red flash of a sheriff's cruiser lit up the field, reflecting off the surface of the lake like fireworks. A deputy stepped out, young mid-20s maybe, but with a tired look that said this wasn't his first nonsense call of the night. Evening, he said cautiously, walking toward us. Someone want to tell me what's going on. Rick launched into his rehearsed complaint. I stood silently, arms folded, waiting for him to finish. When it was my turn, I handed the deputy my ID and the property survey. This is my land, I said. I've owned it for a decade. This lake was dug by my grandfather. I've got the original deed and a digital copy of the county records if you want to see them. I've never signed anything with the HOA and no one ever told me they claimed this area. I camp here all the time. The deputy looked between us. Do you have any paperwork showing this lake is part of HOA property? He asked. Rick hesitated, then admitted, not on me. But I know it's common ground. It's always been considered such. Well, the deputy said, holding up the survey map. This document says otherwise, and unless you can prove that the HOA has legal jurisdiction over this section, I don't see how you can stop the man from camping on his own land. Rick's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. He should have notified the board, he said weakly. There are rules. The deputy cut him off. If he's not part of the HOA and this lake isn't HOA property, those rules don't apply. Rick didn't have anything else to say. As the deputy walked back to his cruiser, I turned back toward the fire, trying to settle the adrenaline rush in my chest. I had come here to relax. I hadn't expected a showdown, but I had a gut feeling. Now something bigger was going on here. And this little HOA might have just made a mistake they couldn't walk back from, because they had just revealed something they didn't seem to realize. They had been trespassing on my land for years. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to climb over the trees, and the lake looked like a sheet of glass catching fire with the first light. But despite the beauty of the scene, I wasn't feeling peaceful. I was still turning over last night's confrontation in my mind, trying to make sense of it. The HOA president, Rick Hammond, had shown up acting like he owned the place, calling the police, accusing me of trespassing, trying to enforce rules that didn't even apply to me. And worst of all, he seemed genuinely confident in his authority. He wasn't just being rude, he really believed he had a say in what happened on my land. I made coffee on my camp stove, sat in my folding chair by the lake, and started flipping through my property folder. I always kept physical documents in the truck just in case, but now I wanted more than proof. I wanted to understand what the HOA thought they had a claim to. Something about Rick's certainty last night gnawed at me. Was it possible that the HOA believed this lake wasn't mine? Had someone filed paperwork without telling me? By mid-morning, I packed up camp and drove the 15 miles into town to the county records office. I'd dealt with the folks there before and knew exactly where to go. A woman named Cheryl sat behind the counter, her reading glasses halfway down her nose, typing slowly on a yellowed keyboard. She gave me a tired smile as I walked in. Back again, she said. You must miss paperwork. Never enough of it, I replied with a half smile. I'm trying to pull up every file tied to parcel 241B. That's my family's ranch. I just want to check if any recent claims or easements were added, especially anything related to the HOA. She nodded and went to work. A few clicks and a small stack of papers later, she handed me a manila folder. This should cover it. No changes since your grandfather's subdivision of the Eastern Ridge back in '92. The lake and the fields surrounding it are all still part of the original deed. No HOA filings ever applied to that parcel. I flipped through the pages. Cheryl was right. Everything was clean. No encroachments, no adjustments, no shared community zones. The lake sat squarely inside my boundaries. My great-grandfather had homesteaded this land in the 1940s, and no homeowners association even existed in this area until the late 2000s. There was no legal overlap. Can I get copies of everything? I asked. Certified, with the county stamp, of course. While I waited, I took a closer look at the survey drawings. That's when I noticed something strange. A dotted line traced along the northern edge of the lake, with small notations marked in faded ink: walking path, community access, open to members. I flipped to the corresponding map notes. It didn't match anything in the official deed, but it looked like someone had tried to overlay a public use plan onto my land. Cheryl, I asked, holding the page up, where did this come from? This page isn't part of the official county file, is it? She adjusted her glasses and squinted. Oh, no, that's not an official map. It must have been scanned in by mistake. Looks like something from an HOA brochure, so they're using unofficial maps to claim access to my lake. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried that, she said with a frown. You might want to check in with the planning department. If someone's been submitting this to new homeowners as part of their welcome packet, that's a whole other issue. That was all I needed to hear. I took my copies, thanked Cheryl, and headed across the hall to the planning office. Sure enough, they had a promotional flyer from the Lakeside Bluffs HOA on file. Right on the front page was a wide, glossy photo of my lake. A family of 4 stood by the shore, fishing rods in hand, with a big caption that read, "Lakefront access for all HOA members." I stared at it, speechless. A staffer named Brian came over to assist. "You okay?" he asked. "This lake," I said, pointing at the photo, "is on private land. My land. This picture was taken from my property. That's my fence in the background." He gave me a sympathetic look. "That's a problem, you're telling me." Brian dug around in his file drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Lakeside Bluffs Subdivision. Inside was a master development plan submitted over 10 years ago. Most of it detailed standard residential plots, roadways, and green spaces. But toward the back was a proposed amendment for community recreation access. A page titled Proposed Walking Path Expansion had a red line sketched around the edge of my lake. There were no signatures, no approvals, just a proposal that had apparently been ignored or quietly discarded. They must have just started telling new buyers that the lake was included. I said aloud, and no one ever checked. Brian nodded. "It happens more than you'd, I think. Some HOAs overreach when they want to add value to their listings. If you don't push back, it becomes assumed access." I stood there for a moment, absorbing it all. They'd been walking all over my land for years, under the impression that it was some kind of public amenity. Not one person had ever contacted me for permission. They'd posted signs, built picnic tables, even installed a trash bin last summer, near the far shore, which I'd always thought was left by hikers or scouts. It was them. The HOA had quietly extended their reach onto my property, and no one had ever told me. I left the planning office with a folder full of proof in my mind, racing. This wasn't just about one bad encounter. This was years of quiet trespass and misinformation, disguised as good intentions. It explained why I'd seen more foot traffic lately, why cars sometimes parked near the west fence, why someone had once asked if they could rent the community lake for a wedding, something that hadn't made sense at the time. They didn't know the truth because Rick never told them. On the drive back to the ranch, I passed several homes with Lakeside Bluffs HOA signs in front of them. Nicely manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, little flags staked in flower beds, cookie-cutter suburbia on what used to be untamed ranchland my family had sold off the northernmost ridge years ago when we didn't need it anymore, and I hadn't paid much attention to how it developed. But now, I realized, that sliver of land had bred an entire web of assumptions, ones that were slowly bleeding into what was still rightfully mine. When I got back to the ranch, I didn't unpack. I went straight to the old barn, pulled out some fence posts, and loaded them in the truck. Then I drove around to the far side of the lake, where a thin trail wound through the trees and down to the shoreline. Sure enough, a worn dirt path, complete with footprints and tire tracks, curved neatly through the brush and ended at a small clearing with a wooden bench and a trash can, both branded with the HOA logo. I stood there, staring. This was deliberate. When it didn't say a word, I just went to work, hammering fence posts into the ground, stringing wire across the trail entrance, and nailing a new sign to the tree at the path's head. Private property. Trespassers will be reported. I was done playing nice. They had crossed a line. Now it was my turn to push back. The following weekend, I returned to the ranch prepared for confrontation. After discovering just how deep the HOA's overreach went, from promotional brochures to unauthorized trails and structures, I knew this wasn't just a case of miscommunication. It was a quiet, organized effort to lay claim to something they didn't own. They had spent years building the illusion that the lake was part of their community space, and it was time to shatter that illusion. I brought with me more than fence posts and warning signs this time. I had printed aerial maps with boundary overlays, the stamped deed, and the development proposal documents from the planning department. I even brought my lawyer's letterhead draft, just in case it came to that. I wasn't the type to jump straight into legal threats, but after the way Rick had ambushed me with law enforcement on my own land, I wasn't taking chances. As I reached the ranch gate, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Someone had cut down the barbed wire I had put up along the trail near the lake. The private property signs were gone. In their place was a new wooden board nailed to the same tree, painted in cheerful blue and white, "Welcome to Lakeside Trail, HOA members." Only there was even a little arrow pointing toward the lake, and a logo in the corner. I stood there, heart pounding, as a wave of fury washed over me. They hadn't just ignored my warnings, they had doubled down. Someone had deliberately come onto my land, removed my signs, and replaced them with their own. Not quietly or out of confusion, no. This was bold, this was public. They were trying to erase my ownership entirely. I snapped photos from every angle: the cut fence, the new sign, the tire tracks leading in. Then I walked straight down to the lake and found a group of 4 people, 2 adults and 2 kids, setting up a picnic under one of the willow trees. "Morning," the woman called cheerfully. "We thought we'd get here early before it gets crowded." I tried to stay calm. "You do know this isn't HOA property, right?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Sorry, we live in lot 12. They told us this is the community lake. It's not. I own this land. The lake, the trail, all of it. She glanced at her husband, who looked confused. That can't be right. We got a map in the welcome packet when we moved in. It showed this area as part of the shared recreation space. Well, I said, pulling the laminated map from my back pocket, that map was wrong, and whoever gave it to you was either misinformed or lying. They looked at each other again, uncertainty blooming across their faces. We're really sorry, she said, beginning to pack up. We didn't mean any harm. We'll leave right away. You're not the ones I'm mad at, I replied. But please tell your HOA to stop encouraging people to trespass. After they left, I stood there staring at the water, trying to process the weight of it all. These weren't bad people. They were just following what they'd been told. And, the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how far the HOA must have gone to maintain this illusion. There was no way this happened accidentally. Someone, probably Rick Hammond, had been feeding this misinformation for years, embedding it into documents, websites, and word of mouth. By early afternoon, I had put up new signs, restored the fencing, and posted laminated notices along the path. The notices had bold, black letters. This property is privately owned. Unauthorized access is considered trespassing under state law. Surveillance cameras have been installed. That last part was a bluff for now, but it gave me an idea. The next day, I called a friend of mine from town named Dave. He ran a small home security business and had helped me install cameras around my farmhouse years earlier after a string of equipment thefts. I explained the situation to him, and by that weekend, we had 4 trail cams hidden in trees and 1 motion-activated camera fixed on the trail entrance. Won't get their faces unless they look straight up, Dave said, adjusting the angle, but you'll see who comes and goes. You're logging every vehicle, to license plates, dates, everything, I replied. And sure enough, by Monday, the cameras were busy. The footage showed 3 different groups entering the trail over the weekend. One family came by on bikes. Another walked down with fishing gear. One older couple even brought folding chairs and a little grill, setting up near the east bank. All of them had been led to believe they had the right to be there, but the kicker came on Wednesday. I got a text alert from the motion cam around noon. When I pulled up the footage, there he was, Rick Hammond, HOA president, walking along the trail with another man I didn't recognize. Rick had a clipboard in one hand and a measuring tape in the other. He pointed at trees, paced along the waterline, and gestured as if he was planning something. I took a still image from the video and printed it the next day. I walked right into the Lakeside Bluffs HOA office. It was a two-room modular building on the edge of their development, decorated with fake plants and framed pictures of smiling families. A young receptionist looked up from her computer and gave me a plastic smile. "Hi, do you have an appointment?" "No," I said calmly, "but I think Mr. Hammond will want to see me." She hesitated, then picked up the phone and whispered something. Less than a minute later, Rick came out of the back office with a tight smile. Well, he said, "if it isn't our lakeside camper, how can I help you?" I pulled the printed still from my folder and slid it across the desk. "Your was going to stop sending people onto my land immediately." Rick's smile didn't budge. "That's not what this is. This photo was taken 2 days ago. That's you, on my land, after you cut down my fencing and put up fake signs. I have footage, timestamps, and a county-certified map proving your HOA has no jurisdiction over the lake or surrounding trail." Rick looked down at the image and sighed through his nose. "Look," he said, finally dropping the friendly tone. "It's not that simple. For years, this area has been considered a shared space by the community. It adds property value. People expect access. If you just gave us a small easement—" "No," I interrupted, my voice sharp now. "There is no easement. There never was, and your personal interests in raising property value don't give you the right to steal my land." He stepped back slightly. "That's a strong word." "It's the right one," I said. Rick's jaw tensed, but he didn't reply. "Giving you one chance," I continued. "You'll inform every homeowner that the lake is private property. You'll update your maps, take down your signs, and stop advertising access in any form, or I'll file trespassing charges and a civil suit. And trust me, I've got everything documented." He stood there silently, eyes locked on mine. "You have 48 hours, I said. "After that, this becomes legal." I turned and walked out without another word. That night, as I sat on the porch of my farmhouse watching the moon rise over the pasture, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of pride and anger. I had exposed them. I'd uncovered the quiet lie that had slipped through the cracks for years. But I also knew something else now. Rick wouldn't back down quietly. He had too much invested in that illusion, and the fight was far from over. 2 days passed, and the silence from Rick Hammond was louder than any answer. I kept checking the HOA website and their community board, expecting some kind of update, maybe a notice retracting lake access, or at least a warning for members to stay off private land. But nothing changed. The trail signs were still up, the community newsletters still mentioned lake days, and there was no trace of my confrontation with Rick at the office. He was pretending like it never happened. By day 3, I knew he wasn't going to do anything unless he was forced to that morning. I drove to the sheriff's department with a USB stick containing my trail cam footage and a folder with my deed, county records, and time-stamped photos of Rick and his team on my land. The deputy I spoke with was the same one who had been called out to the lake during the original 911 call. His name was Cole, young, polite, and visibly annoyed when I laid everything out. "You mean to tell me," he said slowly, flipping through the paperwork, "that the HOA president who called the police on you was actually the one trespassing the entire time?" "Exactly," I replied. "And not just once. Repeatedly he's been promoting this land as community property, letting dozens of families use it without permission. And now he's refusing to correct it. They even tore down my private property signs and replaced them." Cole leaned back in his chair. "That's not a gray area. That's criminal trespass, maybe even fraud if he's advertising what he doesn't control." He called in another officer to review the footage and said he'd forward it to the sheriff himself. They didn't promise immediate action, but I could tell they were taking it seriously. I left the department that afternoon with a copy of the report and a warning that it could take a few days before charges or citations were filed. That was fine with me. I had another plan running in the background, you see. The HOA didn't just try to rewrite my land boundaries, they tangled their story into the fabric of the neighborhood. Every family that moved into Lakeside Bluffs had been sold the promise of exclusive lake access. It was plastered all over their promotional material, used by realtors as a top selling point, and I had gathered proof of every bit of it. Their glossy flyers, their real estate listings, even videos on social media showing HOA lake events complete with canoes, barbecue grills, and big signs reading Lakeside Bluffs, members only. So I took it all, organized it, and sent it to a local news station. It was a small operation, Channel 9 Action Local, mostly known for covering weather, parades, and school board meetings. But when I sent my email with the subject line "Homeowners Association Court Promoting Stolen Lake Access," I got a response within hours. A reporter named Dana called me directly, and once I laid out the story, she asked if she could visit the ranch to film a segment the next day. She arrived with a cameraman, a notepad, and a serious expression. I gave her the tour, showed her the deed, the path, the broken fencing, and the brand new HOA sign still nailed to trees. I told her about the 911 call, the fake maps, and the neighbors who had been misled for years. As we walked along the trail, she asked, "And you're saying no one in the HOA had permission to use this land?" "None," I said firmly. "They've been trespassing, vandalizing, and misleading every family that moved in here for nearly a decade, and now that I've proven it, they're pretending it never happened." By sunset, her crew had enough footage to run the piece. She promised me it would air on the 6 p.m. news the following night, and she wasn't exaggerating. The story blew up bigger than I expected. The segment aired with the headline, "Local HOA Accused of Fraud, Trespassing on Private Ranch Land." Dana stood in front of my lake with a microphone in hand, then cut to drone shots of the trail, the fence, and the laminated signs I had posted. They even blurred the footage of families on my land to protect their privacy, and interviewed a few who had been misled by the HOA. One woman, who had appeared cheerful on the day of her picnic, now looked embarrassed on camera. "We were told this was part of the neighborhood," she said. "I feel awful now knowing it wasn't true. We never would have come here if we knew we were trespassing." Rick declined to appear on camera. The station said he sent a written statement denying all wrongdoing, claiming the HOA had operated in good faith based on historical access and that any disputes would be handled privately. My foot. By the next morning, my inbox was flooded. Neighbors, reporters, even an attorney from a neighboring HOA who congratulated me for standing up to what he called the creeping HOA entitlement trend. Several Lakeside Bluffs homeowners reached out to apologize and express their frustration with the board. They had believed Rick, trusted the materials they were given, and now felt betrayed. But the real blow came a week later. I got a call from a local real estate agency, one that frequently sold homes in the Lakeside Bluffs subdivision. The woman on the other end of the line, a senior broker named Lacey, had a question. "Do you own the lake?" she asked, voice calm but serious. "Yes." "And you're not granting access to HOA members?" "No, never have, never will." There was a pause. Then she sighed. "Rick's been advertising this lake access for over 8 years. He even included it in the formal disclosures to buyers. This is going to create legal issues for us." "Not my problem," I said, but deep down, I knew it was going to be someone's problem, probably Rick's. Later that same day, I drove past the HOA building and noticed a small crowd outside. Some were arguing, others were reading a printed notice on the glass door. I parked nearby and walked over just close enough to read it. It was a public announcement, emergency HOA board meeting Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Topic, lake access and legal concerns. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway that Thursday. I stood in the back corner of the community hall while Rick stood at the podium, flanked by 2 other board members. His face was flushed, his words rehearsed but shaky. "Let me be clear," he said, holding up a stack of papers. "There's been some confusion surrounding the lake access. We were under the impression that the area had been included in the development agreement when the subdivision was approved. That turns out to be inaccurate. Inaccurate, someone shouted. You mean we've been trespassing for years? Rick stammered. We'll have had access for years without objection. And in the absence of a formal dispute, objection was made, I said loudly from the back. You just ignored it. Heads turned. Rick froze. He tried to keep talking, but the crowd had shifted its attention. I walked forward slowly and held up the map, the deed, and a copy of the county's certified letter. This land, I said clearly, has been in my family since 1946. It was never part of your subdivision. You have no right to use it, and you never did. What you've done is sell false promises to every homeowner here. You've exposed them to legal risk, and you've used my property to do it. The silence in the room was thick. No one came to Rick's defense. The board members glanced at each other nervously, and whispers broke out among the crowd. Rick stepped down from the podium without another word. The meeting ended shortly after that, but the fallout had only begun. The next day an email went out to all HOA members. It contained a formal retraction of any claim to the lake, a warning not to access the trail or water under any circumstances, and a new map excluding my land entirely. Rick's name was no longer listed as board president, and, just like that, they were forced to face the truth. The morning after the confrontation with the HOA felt different. There was a weight lifted from my shoulders, a sense that something had shifted not just in the way others viewed me and my land, but in the way I viewed myself. I had stood my ground, calmly and legally, against a group that had assumed power for far too long. The fire pit was still warm from the night before, and the sunrise painted the sky in soft hues of peach and lavender. I brewed coffee on my portable stove, savoring the silence. For the first time in a long time, it truly felt like my land again, but I knew the silence wouldn't last long. Sure enough, around 9 a.m., I spotted a familiar SUV slowly rolling up the dirt path to the lake. It was the same HOA president, Mr. Calhoun, looking far less confident than he had 2 nights ago. He stepped out of his vehicle slowly, not in a rush, his hand slightly raised in a non-threatening gesture. I stood and waited. Morning, he said, forcing a polite tone. Mind if I say a few words? I didn't answer right away. I simply gestured toward the folding camp chair across from me. He sat stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the silence that followed. Look, he began, I want to apologize for how things were handled. I reviewed the documentation you showed the deputy. It's clear now we made some mistakes. Mistakes, I repeated, narrowing my eyes. You called the police on me for camping on my own land. You told people I didn't belong here. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting to the lake. I know, and I regret that. We operated on some outdated maps and old assumptions. Honestly, we thought the lake was community managed. No one checked the original property lines, and when the HOA was formed, things just carried on from there. Carried on by locking gates on my own road, charging me fees to maintain land that wasn't even yours. He winced. It wasn't meant to be hostile, it just got out of hand. I scoffed. You think this is just about overgrown paperwork? You made me feel like an intruder in my own home. You embarrassed me in front of the whole community. I'm truly sorry, he said, and to his credit, he seemed genuine. The board's meeting this week will be redrawing the boundaries and officially removing any HOA jurisdiction over your property. You'll also be refunding every fee you collected for land you had no authority over, I added firmly. He hesitated. We can discuss that. No, you'll refund it, I said, or I take this whole mess to court. And believe me, I've got every document lined up and ready. Calhoun nodded slowly, understood. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Birds chirped overhead. A fish leaped in the distance, splashing back into the calm water. I'll never trust the HOA again, I finally said. Not after this. And I'm going to make sure my story gets out. People need to know they don't have to roll over when they're right. You thought I wouldn't push back, that I'd leave quietly, but I didn't, and I won't. He didn't respond, but the message was clear. Calhoun left shortly afterward, leaving me alone once again beside the lake. By noon, word had clearly spread. A few neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years wandered down to the lake, cautiously curious. The first was an older woman named Denise who lived 2 houses down from the main road entrance. She brought lemonade and a sheepish smile. I just wanted to say, she started, I didn't know the HOA didn't have control over this land. I feel awful now, knowing they lied about it. They didn't lie to you, I replied. They lied to themselves, then told you a story they never bothered to verify. She nodded, setting the lemonade on the table. Well, I hope you keep coming out here. This lake always felt peaceful because you took care of it. Now I see why. Over the next couple of days, others trickled in. Some apologized, some didn't, some just stood on the edge of the lake like they were seeing it for the first time, knowing now it belonged to someone else, someone they tried to exclude. It was surreal. But I didn't gloat, I didn't throw it in their faces. I let the truth do the talking. A few days later I received a certified letter from the HOA board. It was brief but formal. They acknowledged the legal property lines, released any claims over my lake or the surrounding land, and assured me their records had been corrected. Attached to the letter was a check every fee I'd paid since the formation of the HOA was returned in full. I deposited it the next morning and hired a survey team the same afternoon to install permanent, professionally marked boundary signs around the lake. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Again, that weekend I brought my family out to the ranch. My brother brought his fishing gear. My niece and nephew helped pitch tents while my sister-in-law made campfire stew. We sat around the flames that night, laughing, reminiscing, and sharing stories. Not once did I feel watched. Not once did I hear the buzz of HOA drones or see a patrol truck crawling along the fence line. I was free, truly free, and maybe most importantly, I had reclaimed more than just my land. I had reclaimed my dignity. The confrontation had sparked something much larger in the neighborhood. Several other homeowners began looking into their deeds, and whispers of other boundary issues began to circulate. Some realized they had more rights than they were told. Others found out their properties had been mishandled for years. Slowly but surely, the HOA began facing the scrutiny it had long avoided, meant to become a symbol. But somehow, standing by my lake that night, listening to the gentle rustle of leaves and watching the moonlight shimmer across the water, I realized that what I'd done mattered not just to me, but to every person who'd ever been pushed around by an overreaching authority. Some people confuse control with order, but true peace only comes when people know their rights and have the courage to stand up for them. So that's how it ended. Not with a fistfight, not with a courtroom drama, but with the quiet, powerful moment of a man claiming what was his and refusing to be pushed away ever again. If this story opened your eyes, don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment. Subscribe to Bright Reality for more true stories that hit harder than fiction.